Hello, welcome to Practical C++ Programming, the beginner course. My name is Zach, and in this tutorial we will be discussing advanced input and output manipulation. And to do that, I've already got the code that we used from the last tutorial with file input. And if you remember, we're just grabbing some names from this names.txt file, and we're storing them in a variable when we read it in our pre-read. And then as long as we haven't reached the end of file, we are taking this temp variable and copying it to our array with the index of 0, and then we add 1 to it each time as we go through. And the output was just this names list that we have. But what I want to discuss is these tips and tricks for advanced file input, output manipulation, and these techniques are going to help you whenever you get in funny situations. And the first technique I want to talk about is if you get a file with something like this. Now this is a header, and many files have headers, but if we run this program right now and we change, for instance, we would have to change this to 12 before we did it, but if we ran it, it wouldn't crash, but we would get, well, let me make sure that I have this right. So yeah, so let me save it first because I haven't saved it. But if we save it now it's saved, and we ran it again, now we get names up here. So we read in this, but what if we don't want that? We don't want to populate our array with this header. We just want to ignore it. Well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to use a function called ignore. So let's change this back to 11. We're going to go down here, and before our pre-read, we're going to specify with a function that we want to ignore that header. And to do that, we access the function with our input stream file handle, which was input file, dot ignore, which is a function. In this function, it has two parameters that we need to use. The first is the amount of characters that we want to ignore, which is 255. And the reason it's 255 is because in a console window, in a C++ application, in the console window, there is 255 characters on each line. So if we specify 255, then it will ignore this whole line in the console window, and the cursor will be moved to right here, right before Zach. And the other parameter that we want to specify is what's known as a delimiter, and that's a character that says if you reach this character, then go ahead and start reading, quit ignoring. And this is a new line character, and later in this tutorial we're going to go over this in depth because this is also a advanced formatting option that I want to discuss with you guys. But this is a new line delimiter, which means basically if you get to the end of this line, you're going to reach a new line character. I want you to quit ignoring, because when you get to a new line character, you're going to end up right here, right before Zach. So that's what the delimiter does. So now if we run this program again with the ignore function in, we only pick up the names that we want, and it ignores the header just like we wanted it to. So moving on, I want you to go ahead and memorize this function because you will be using it a lot more than likely with file input. But moving on, we're going to discuss this guy right here, these special formatting characters. And we're going to do that here at the bottom of our main function. We're going to say something along the line. Let's give us some space. And we're going to say, this is a new line character. And then we're going to put several of these in. Those are 3 new line characters. \n, \n, \n. And essentially what we're doing is, by putting these \n's in with our string, it's not going to print these. These are basically the same thing as saying this. But instead, we can just use the formatting character with the \n and accomplish the same thing. And if we run it, you'll see exactly what I mean. We get 3 new lines right here below our output because we added these new line characters. So let's move on to another example of these special characters that we can use. We're going to use the formatting tab character. And we'll say this is a tab character. And then we're gonna enter in 4 tab characters, which are \T's, and we'll say tab, and then a couple of \N's to give us some space. Because remember, those are the same thing as new line characters. And these are going to be our tab characters, and you'll see what I mean in a second when we run it. So we run it, and you can see all this space in between tab and this is a tab character, and that's where these \T's come into play. So that's a special formatting option you can use. The other one that I want to show you is quotation marks. We'll say this is a quote, and we'll do \quotation, and we'll say quote \quotation, and then a couple of new line characters in the quotation marks. And what this \quotation does is it escapes the string and it puts these in, because if we take out this \, then it messes up our string. So we have to have that in there, and this is just a special formatting option, and when we run it, you'll see we'll be able to actually have quotations in our output. And it says this is a quote, and then has quotation marks quote. So that will be useful to you in the future whenever you need to use these escape characters, and there's plenty more of them that you can use, and I suggest that you probably go try to look up some of them and see what you can do with this output. Okay, moving on, I want to go ahead and discuss one more thing with you, or actually we're going to do a couple more things, but one more with file input before we continue, and that is we're going to go to names.txt, and what if we had something like Troy Hodges here? Well, Troy Hodges, that's a last name, and if we change this to 12, I'll show you what happens when we actually run this. So we'll run it, and instead of saying Troy Hodges, oops, we need to save it real quick before we do that. Okay, so there we have it saved. Well, let's run it one more time, and instead of saying Troy Hodges, it says Troy and then Hodges on the next line. And that's not what we want. We want the whole name on this same line. But what's happening is, in a file, as soon as the scanner gets to a whitespace character, it assumes that that's the end of what we're reading, and puts that into our temporary variable. So what we need is a function that will read this whole line and put that in a single variable. And that's what we're going to use. So just like we used input_file.ignore, we're going to use another function called getLine. We're going to put it in our pre-read and post-read. In the getLine function, all you do is type getLine. You specify the input stream that you're using, which we're using input file that we specified, and then you specify the variable that you want to hold the string in, or the line in, which we're calling temp. And we're going to do that for both of these. We'll say getLine input file, comma temp. And that changes our pre-read and post-read to where it reads in a whole line instead of just a single string value. And when we run it, you'll see the difference. Now we get Troy Hodges on one line, whereas before it was separated into 2 separate variables. Now it's holding this whole value in one index of the array. So that's the getLine function. And then one last thing I want to show you is what's called the I/O manipulation library, which is the input-output manipulation library. And if you include I/O manip, you can do some really cool things with output, and I'll show you what I mean. So we'll come down here and we'll say cout left, which specifies a left alignment. We'll say set precision to 2, and then fixed. And what this does is it specifies left alignment, set the precision to 2, and what that means is that decimal values will only hold 2 places, or any value for that matter. So if you have the number 200, it's really just going to look like 20, because it's not going to hold that other 0. Well, what fixed does, fixed says take this set precision and only apply it to the right of the decimal place. So now if you have 200, it will hold the whole number 200 plus 0.00. Or if you have 200.134, it will only hold the value 200.13. So let me show you what I mean. We're going to make a double value 201.792, and we got to give that a name. We'll call it double value equals, and then we're just going to output that. We'll say cout, end a couple lines, and we'll say double value. And when we do that, you'll see that we only get 201.79 and not 201.792. And that's because we used this I/O manipulation technique to set the precision to 2 after the decimal point. That's exactly what we did. And one last thing I want to show you is what's called the set width. So we're going to go ahead and make another value called integer value equals 227. And what we'll do is we'll say cout. We'll give us a little bit of space. We'll say cout set w, specify 25, which is 25 characters. Then we'll say double value. Then we'll say set w again 25, and we'll say integer value end line. And what this does, this sets the width to 25 between each value of output. And you'll see what I mean. When we run it now, we get 201.79, a width of 25 characters, and then 227. And then if you printed out something again, you would have another width of 25 in between it, because we specified to put another one right here. And that's exactly what that does. So I suggest you play around with these advanced output and input manipulation techniques, and you'll learn that you can do some really cool things. So thank you for watching, and stay tuned.